Hi, this is Craig Lane with Video Blog Week 18. I'm a bit PO'd because my Week 18 first draft or first take ended right as I was ending, and YouTube wouldn't save it for me. So we'll move along, and this is Craig Lane with Health Alchemy, HealthAlchemy, healthalchemy.com. And this week we're going to talk about Week 18. We're going to talk about various typing systems and the value and the negatives of taking on too much here, and maybe even taking on any of them if you're one to sort of go against typing. So we talk about typing. There are various types of nutritional types or body types out there, and each system believes that they have the best or they have a good system, and there is value. And so what I tell my clients and other practitioners too is that if you have a type, like if your muscle testing is your system, or if iridology is your system, or if Chinese medicine is your system, then you stick within your system and you stay consistent. So for people out there looking at being a type, whether it's a metabolic type, an elemental type, or a blood type, or an organ type, is give it a chance to work. Give it a few weeks, a few months. Like if you're trying to fix your connective tissue or spinal back problems, you're probably only going to give it 6 months to a year ultimately, although you should subjectively be feeling better in any system within a month. So in any system you're using, one of the things that, if you're not getting results within 3 or 4 weeks of feeling better, i.e. less pain, more energy, whatever your main complaint is, it should be on its way to feeling at least much better within 3 to 4 weeks. If you're not, you need to, talk to your practitioner and say, let's go another direction, because ultimately you're paying the practitioner to work with you. So the thing about types is that I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about each of the types, and I'm not going to present value or not necessarily, just some information about each, and then at the end I'll talk about combining types and the value and non-value of each. So there's the metabolic type, and within the metabolic typing system, Dr. Mercola has a great questionnaire where you can be labeled as a protein type, what I call a carbohydrate or veggie type, and then there's a mixed type. So I myself am very clear I'm a protein type. The protein types choose the high fat meat and a higher fat diet, lower carbohydrate than the other two types. And I knew this because I craved bacon as a kid, craved the fatty meats, craved the fatty nuts, craved the dark meat instead of the light meat, craved the fatty fish like salmon versus the low fat fish like sole or snapper. And then there's your carbohydrate or veggie type, and they typically do better burning carbohydrate for energy a bit more. So, and they choose maybe a low fat dairy versus a high fat dairy. And again, I had a rant that I like to just go on a bit about, dairy. If you want low fat dairy, just dilute it. If the fat's being processed out unnaturally, then you're going to damage the very delicate dairy proteins and enzymes. So many of you know me that I don't believe in pasteurized milk. I don't even touch it. I would rather go hungry than have it. And if I'm forced to use it, then I'm going to take enzymes with it, because the minerals are unavailable through the pasteurization or cooking process, and the proteins are basically destroyed or severely damaged, that they're harder to take up by the body. So in the metabolic typing, the carbohydrate or veggie type, they're going to choose light meat versus dark meat. They're going to choose lower fat fish and lower fat cuts of meat than the high fat cuts. They're going to choose a bit more carbohydrate versus protein. I am a fan of combining our foods properly, separating out protein from starch at different meals, which would go against the metabolic type, which is the mixed type, which they're encouraged, based on Dr. Mercola's system, to mix protein and carbohydrate. And that may be the case. Ultimately our diet's our own exploration, so I won't refute. So I do see people that, it's one less thing to worry about, right? You say you have to combine your foods well, no protein with starch, and then you've got this other type thing going on, and it's like you get into this anal mess. And then in metabolic typing, you could also be as fast or a slow oxidizer, which there's a lot of value in that, because if you're a slow oxidizer and you're eating foods like high fat and high protein, that might slow you down a bit more. If you're a slow oxidizer, if you're a fast oxidizer, then you kind of need to be slowed down, what they call a ketogenic diet. which is going to help you out a bit to slow you down, versus a glucogenic diet, which is more carbohydrate based, is going to speed you up, like kindling on the fire. That's what fat and protein are to me, is they're like big logs on the fire, and the carbohydrates, and especially the more simple, the carbohydrate like fruit and sugars, are typically like kindling. They burn really bright and then they burn out, and you end up with this blood sugar spike and a blood sugar drop. And then your metabolic type has other attributes that you might look into, and my friend Mike McAvoy of Mike McAvoy Nutrition does a great job with this. Then you can be an elemental type. You could be the 4 primal elements that I have studied over the years, and are earth, air, water, and fire. So we have earth, which is like the solid. We have water, we have air, and we have fire. And then in Chinese medicine, you take out air and you add in wood and metal, and they have a 5-element system. In Ayurveda, they add in ether, which is the space in which all things are contained, and there's a whole other cosmology around Ayurveda that goes back thousands and thousands of years that I'm not even going to attempt to explain here, because it's just, how do you explain something that's got so many, side tangents and history? So we'll leave it at that for now. But what's interesting is the Ayurvedic system is very similar to the Native American system and the old Greek system, which is you've got your 4 basic elements: earth, air, water, and fire, which are very observable. What's good about that system? And then in Ayurveda they have the 3 doshas: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. And I know I'm not pronouncing those completely correctly, but so be it. And each of those doshas has a certain number of elements. So like your Pitta is your fire type, very high oxidizer, your athlete. Then you've got your Kapha type, which is earth and water. They're a bit like the Flintstones. If you remember the Flintstones, they're more earth-based people. You got your Vata types, and they tend to be your intellectuals and your philosophers. You can see the Vata in me because I have sort of a longer, skinnier head. It's kind of like ectomorph, mesomorph, endomorph, right? You've got endomorph, ectomorph, mesomorph, and so like your mesomorphs are a good balance of the two. I believe your ectomorph is the head would be reversed, right? I'd have a wide head that's short. That's a classic physically based person, or Kapha type, or ectomorph. Then your endomorph, I might have mixed these up, but your endomorph is your intellectual type. It's really interesting that different systems sort of tie these things together. Then you can have a blood type, and the blood type diet, and you could rant on and on about that. There's the O, which is the ancient blood type, and they tend to do well with what I call heirloom foods, paleo diet, meat, veggies, roots, berries, and I don't think I mentioned dairy or not, but dairy can be good for this type. Depends on your ancestry, which is another whole typing system. Are you a African type? Are you a European type? Are you Middle Eastern type? Are you East Asian, which Asia encompasses so much. You can have parts of Russia, you can look at Afghanistan, you can look at Ukraine, you could look at Korea, you can look at China, you can look at Thailand, you can look at the Indian sort of continent, and you just got a lot of stuff to look at here. So the value of the blood type is that it shows us, like, the O doesn't do well with modern foods of commerce, and grain especially. The A tends to be natural vegetarian. The O tends to be a natural meat eater. It's really interesting. I see this a lot. People just asking them for questions, and without their parents even telling what they should or should not do. The A tends to be a natural vegetarian. The O tends to not. And then the B is the next mutation in the human genome. If you believe in evolution, then O is the ancient, non-mutated blood type, non-evolved to the modern world. The A is a bit more evolved with the agrarian lifestyle. The B is the next mutation in the human genome, and the AB is more recent in the last couple thousand years. They're the adaptarians, as Mr. Diadamo puts it in his book. I find a lot of value in some of the generalities and clinical best of the best, worst of the worst here. There are certain medicine foods for your blood type, and there's certain poison foods, and there's a lot of neutral foods. I think the neutral food list needs to be expanded because ancestry plays a huge part in this, as most of the world is type O. And so to generalize, we really want to use our mind here and not generalize a whole population group that transcends race and ancestry. So we really want to take ancestry into effect. It's another, where our ancestors live. What did they eat? Then there's your organ type. The organ typing system is what organ's dominant in your body that you draw a lot of your energy from. So you could be a liver dominant person, you could be a pituitary dominant, you could be thyroid dominant, you could be adrenal dominant, you could be gonadally dominant, i.e. the ovarian dominant in a woman. Um, Dr. Abravanel, I was introduced to this sort of organ typing book, and he believes that there is no gonadally dominant male, which, sort of could be disputed, but I'm not sure. I don't know enough about the system to really say. So there's a gonadally dominant woman, but there is no gonadally dominant man, which, why couldn't a man be testicularly dominant? I don't see I'll have to read the book a bit more. But anyways, so you got your organ type, and then you've got your seasonal influences where you live, or a factor to consider in what you eat. You're going to eat different in the winter than the summer. That's one of the things I teach. You're going to eat different in a wet climate versus a dry climate. When I was in Phoenix a few weeks ago, it's very hot and dry. So I salted my water, a lot of salt in my water. Of course, Celtic or Himalayan crystal salt, because it helps hydrate the body and moisturize it a bit more. If you use too much salt, though, salt will dry you out. So that's the thing about salt you want to be careful with, is not to overdo salt in too high of a quantity. Then your age is an influence of what you're going to eat, your current condition. So if you've got an injury like I do now, you really want to be careful. I'm using foods that are high in manganese and certain foods that are high in proteoglycans and mucopolysaccharides to develop the joint in my knee is a little bit off from the strain. And there's a lot of little things. Your ancestry is also a factor. So the reason why I'm doing this video blog is just to remind people that you could get caught up in a lot of stuff in your head. And one of the threads I want to bring in here is that we can digest things mentally. We can digest things emotionally. We can digest things physically. But if we're thinking about, like, gee, in the Ayurvedic type, the vatas are supposed to eat this and avoid this, and in the organ type, you're supposed to eat this and avoid this, and then your metabolic type, you need to eat this and avoid this. And on top of that, I've also got an elemental type where I'm a wood type, and so I need to eat this and avoid this. And you can see, like, by the time you've gotten the best and the worst of everything plugged into a spreadsheet, which I have actually done for myself, I've taken a lot of these little systems into this program. And, I ended up with like maybe 10 or 15 foods, and I was like, that's a pretty limited diet there. And it's all head-based. So when we overthink things or brood in Chinese medicine, we actually weaken digestion because we're chewing up or digesting up here. We're not giving the energy to digest down in our gut. And I would give that clinical validity a big thumbs up. That definitely, when student syndrome in Chinese medicine is definitely a phenomena to be addressed, for sure. So when we're thinking too much, we're not going to be digesting as well. It's probably why I do a liquid diet a lot, because I tend to be a thinker, and I want to be really in touch with the subtle elements when I'm with people, especially too, because if I have a full belly, I tend to feel a bit disconnected from people on the subtle realms. So that's kind of the nutshell of it. Is you could get overly thinking about things and then getting stressed, and stress also inhibits true levels of health. And on top of this, I'm reminded to bring it up that there are certain foods for each of us that are what I call thrive foods. They're medicines that give us a lot of energy if we don't overdo it. And then there are foods that are what I call toleratable foods that, sure, you can eat them, but they're not going to give you optimal health, nor optimal energy, nor optimal rebuilding structure. And then there's downright poisons for us. And I know that for me, there aren't too many poisons per se, because I've developed a certain level of health. But if we're sicker than others, then we're going to have a certain level of foods that are just going to be outright poisons for us. Obviously, there are certain foods that are poisons, like kava is a low-level poison. Kava. Caffeine's a low-level poison. You're not going to thrive drinking 10 cups of coffee a day. You might thrive, so you think, drinking 1 or 2 a day. But in the long run, it's a low-level poison. It's draining the system. It's an extreme food in the systems that I've studied and in my personal experience. So there are certain extreme foods, and then there's foods that are great for daily, for the most part, and then you have to pick within those. And this is your own exploration, ultimately. So, just a basic introduction to some of these. I'm going to do a whole video blog probably on the metabolic typing system, the positives and negatives. I'll do a whole video blog on the Chinese medical and the macrobiotic elemental types. The blood types. They're all worthy of a little more explanation than the survey I've given you today. But I want to introduce the fact that if you're in a typing system, you could play it to the nth degree and just get really ridiculous with this. You know, you could really just take on too much. And I see people, they're going and seeing this expert for this. The acupuncturist says I should eat this, and then the doctor says I should eat this and avoid this, and take these statin drugs, and then the chiropractor says this, and then then my physical therapist says this, and then they end up really confused, and the internet says this, and my friends say that, and then I say, well, gee, how many nutritionists that really know what they're talking about have you seen? And a lot of my clients will go, oh yeah, there's that light bulb that goes off, like, oh, maybe I should actually talk to a nutritionist who knows what he's talking about. That's a couple of my parameters if I'm telling people to look for a nutritionist. Make sure it's non-dogmatic, you know, unless you want a specific, like, go see a raw foodist if you want to cleanse and you're living in the tropics, and that's a great system for the tropics. If you're going to be a fruitarian, you probably need to live in the tropics. You're not going to do well on a very high fruit diet here in this climate, especially as far north as we are, where it's cold a lot. If you want to do a paleo diet, then talk to somebody that's their paleo expert. But if you want an all around, like, getting yourself in a good position, I think that my personal philosophy is just be able to, I want to understand all the systems, who's going to do well within one and maybe not so well within another, and really help the client, get to a place where maybe they don't want to be typed at all. Maybe they just want to explore this for themselves, and then we provide a roadmap, you explore the road, and then you come back and report back to me, and then we sort of process it. It's an exploration, like the word. So in the typing system, you may find that there's a certain type that works for you. So people go out and they get muscle tested, and there's certain, that's what the body is telling them in that moment. That's why I think muscle testing can't be duplicated, because you've got the practitioner's energy, the person's energy, and that's a whole other video blog I'm not going to go into. But the point being that you could be typed as someone who needs liver assistance on a muscle testing, and that's great, but you want to probably be muscle tested again in 2 to 4 weeks to see if that's all been cleared, and you move on to something else in your body. So really, it's a rich exploration out there. There's a lot of options. There's a lot of great people doing great things, and there's also a lot of people that, in my opinion, probably should study a bit more and get more experience and learn under someone that's a bit non-ideological. I think that I run from people now that they're that extreme, where they're inflexible in their raw foodism, or they're inflexible in their sort of Pritikin high carbohydrate, low fatism. So I run people that don't want to engage in discussion, that don't want to engage and debate. I'm not here to be right. I'm really here for truth, and I'm here to assist people find their own truth. I drink 2 gallons of raw milk a week. It's what works for me. Not every week, but it works really well for me. But I wouldn't recommend that as a general everyone should be doing. I don't like the word should, and so I think that the shoulders need to really have a look at that word and see how tight they get inside. And they can't control the world the way they think it should be, then it's not that great. So I'm going to sign off now. This is Craig Lane with Health Alchemy, week 18 video blog about typing, and I hope you all have a lovely, lovely day, and look forward to our next week. Unsure what it's going to be so far, but really enjoying the spring weather here in Santa Cruz. Namaste.